as if Taylor Swift needed another thing, that might actually be the anthem that we all need to work our way through what we're all here to talk about. Who knew you'd get over 100 people into a Zoom on a Monday afternoon? All it takes is some big news on a Friday. Might have to start queuing that up every week. Thank you all for being here today. I want to make sure, okay, it looks like we've got myself and Andrew Ginter both on the big screen. Hopefully you saw as you came in. This is not going to be the only conversation that we have about what has and will continue to transpire. There's a couple things that were really important to Andrew and I as we connected. We spent we spend most of every day together at this point, but we spent some time together on Friday and then over the weekend talking about everything that was coming out in the news. And what was most important for us was ensuring that we have the most educated agent body, because we know that if he and I are getting a bunch of phone calls, you're probably getting a bunch of communications from your agents, or excuse me, from your clients and other agents as well. And so what we're going to do today is have a conversation about everything that's going on, dispel some rumors and some clickbait that's out there in the universe, and hopefully leave everyone feeling a little bit better about their chosen profession and understanding a lot of value that we are going to bring to bear for you all as agents over the course of the next several weeks and always as we navigate a changing market. So, Andrew, thanks for joining me this afternoon.
For sure. I'm glad to do this with you.
So why don't we start? You and I did one of these. It was the most viewed item on our Keller Williams Greater Metropolitan training page for YouTube. It was the most viewed item we've ever had, and I would like to attribute that to the fact that it was you and I having a conversation. But it was actually the first conversation we had about those lawsuits that took place or came online in the fall of last year, or started to come to a head in the fall last year. So what's the background on this case? Like, the settlement maybe for some people came out of nowhere.
Yeah. So, and I think it is interesting that this is really, we're still only like 4 or 5 months removed, I guess, from Halloween, which was when the actual
right.
initial result came out from the court case that started actually hearing oral arguments in court, I believe on October 11th or something like that, if I remember right. But these are cases that go all the way back to 2019 and just took a very, very, very long time to get to the finish line. But ultimately, there's a whole lot of noise about what this whole thing is about, and really, it was ultimately about one thing, and that is unilateral compensation offered from listing brokers to buyers brokers in the MLS is ultimately what it boiled down to. And that the argument made about that was that the person most affected by that be either the buyer or the seller, but the fact that like the buyer has no say in what's happening for the service provider that they're hiring, which was a big problem in the buyer cases. Ultimately, these are all going to get settled from one seller case, but that was a big argument in the buyer cases, was just that the buyer was removed from negotiating that fee for service. And then on the seller side, just that sellers were arguably paying more than they thought was fair because there was this just blanket unilateral compensation offered to buyers agents.
So that is, you mentioned a few different cases, right? So like there are actually multiple class action lawsuits at various levels, because I know the Stitzer Burnett was just in Missouri, and then there was a class that was going to be national. And so a lot of these settlements that we're hearing about, they're meant to kind of put an end to that ever-growing list of lawsuits. Is that fair?
Yeah, all of these settlements are tied to the Stitzer Burnett case, but all of them have reflection. It's reflected clearly from Remax, Anywhere, Keller Williams, and now NAR, that that these settlements would settle any future cases relating to this specific piece of. Now, could there be a lawsuit about something else that's deemed to be on the fringe? I don't know. But there's all these cases will be settled at the same time by these settlements, assuming they get accepted by the judge, which has not happened yet.
Okay, so that was going to be my next question. On Friday, a bunch of news outlets released, leaked documents about the NAR settlement. And we'll get into like some of the clickbait that was out there in that ecosystem. But what has actually happened at this point? Because did anyone's world change over the weekend?
No. Yeah. And that was one thing. I had some conversations this morning with agents who were, listing houses this week and are thinking that they have to do things differently and they don't even know what that different is necessarily. And yeah, in the short run, nothing is changing, only because these are all proposed settlements that the language in all of them would lead you to believe that defendants and plaintiffs have agreed to these settlements. But ultimately, these settlements have to be approved by the federal court.
Yep. Okay, so that's an important thing because there's already information pouring out from brokerages and news outlets and media outlets that's saying here's everything that's changing, but the details of the actual settlement are while maybe likely to be approved, they could still change a little bit.
Yeah, and I truthfully can't even weigh in on the likelihood. Is it 50-50 or 90-10? I don't have any experience with that, so I have no idea. But I can't imagine that the court system would get in the way of plaintiffs and defendants coming to an understanding unless that understanding was still wholly illegal. But that's exactly what all the changes are, is to rectify the things that have been deemed to be antitrust violations.
It's like we would never expect a real estate agent to come between a buyer and a seller, right? That's important to know because nothing will necessarily have to change until it is required to change. But there are some expected changes in the industry, right? We know in reading the settlement, pouring over that 108-page document, there are some pretty clear things that are intended outcomes of this settlement. Is that fair?
Oh, for sure. For sure. Okay. I mean, buyer agreement certainly being the biggest one. But there's changes that will happen. It's just a matter of how they're going to happen at this point.
So let's just dive right in on that in terms of buyer representation. This is a big part of it for a couple of the reasons that you talked about right at the start. But what's the expectation on what could or would be likely to change?
Well, I mean, I think at least based on NAR settlement, it sounds like buyer agency agreements are going to be treated similarly to consumer guides that we have now, that basically just kind of share the rules of the road only from an agency perspective. And now buyer agent agreements are going to be required at some point. And similar to a consumer guide, if you end up in front of the division with some kind of a complaint and you've got a consumer guide that's dated the same day you wrote an offer, you're going to have a problem because that should have been dated the day you met them, not the day you wrote an offer. So we're going to have to get in the habit of that. And truthfully, that's the spirit of this whole thing, is buyers agents having a conversation with buyers about what a buyer agent does for them and what a buyer agent gets paid for it. That's the whole point of these lawsuits. So that's the fix for the whole thing, is just buyers agreeing, yeah, I'd love to work with Sally and I think Sally's great and I understand Sally's going to get paid 3% or 2% or 5%, whatever. And I get it that we may get that money from the seller, we may get that money from the listing broker, or I may pay.
Okay, so that's the first and maybe most significant in terms of the function of us as realtors, is we are going to start relationships by demonstrating and articulating value and then getting our clients to say, I understand this, and I'm willing to play by these circumstances.
For sure.
Now, you and I talked a little this morning. Even it's like, there are a number of agents in this office and plenty throughout our local market that effectively would change nothing.
Mhm.
Right? How many times have we heard a really great agent say, "I wouldn't show somebody a house without doing a buyer consultation ahead of time, or having pre-approvals, or pick your barrier to entry." Maybe because we haven't set one as an industry, one is now going to effectively be set for us. Is that fair?
Yeah, because I would say it's a fairly small percentage of our agents currently that actually use buyer agency agreements, but that next step up, which is what you mentioned there, that people having buyer consultations before starting to work with a buyer, I would say at that point we're probably talking about somewhere in the ballpark of at least a quarter, if not closer to half of our agents are doing that. So if you're currently doing that and not using a buyer agency agreement, this is a very easy thing to start instituting, right? If you're not doing that, you've got a little more work to do, a little more, bad weight to lose.
Yeah. So there is a lot of conversation, and one of my favorite headline, I forget which, maybe it was the New York Times, was National Association of Realtors ends 6% commission for all agents. I didn't realize at the time that NAR had the ability to set commission or remove it for all agents, but there is some stuff around how commission is going to be articulated or offered. Is that fair?
For sure, for sure. And I mean, one's very, very big, because we've lived by the fact that we are protected on the buyer side by the MLS, because the MLS is our contractual agreement at the moment amongst participants that says, if anybody that's a participant of this MLS shows and sells my listing, this is what they get. Right. And that's, no questions asked. Even in scenarios where then there's a fight about the commission because the number was wrong or the agent screwed up the amount they put in the MLS, doesn't matter. Like, that's the contract between brokers. So that will be no more. And so that's a huge issue that we're going to have to figure out all the ways that it can be resolved. But nothing in this settlement or any of the other settlements says that sellers can't pay commissions to buyers agents, or listing brokers can't offer part of their commission to buyers brokers, or buyers can't pay their own commission, or buyers can't get seller concessions to pay commission. So those things all still exist. Now it's just a matter of like, what are going to be the good mechanisms and the right mechanisms to facilitate that.
So I want to ask you to say what you said again, because I think that it is a really important piece of the puzzle for agents who list homes, or people who work even primarily with buyers, that the narrative that is taking place right now is buyer's agency is dead, and that no one's ever going to list a home for more than 3% ever again, because that's all that the seller was going to agree to pay.
Yeah. So I mean, like I said, this clearly doesn't outlaw cooperation payment, right? So now it's just a matter of how we're going to do it. And the difference is, it's not going to be unilaterally decided by a listing broker or a listing broker and a seller. It's going to be ultimately decided also by the buyer, because, like, let's say what ultimately gets communicated is that a seller's willing to provide a certain amount in seller concessions to pay for things for the buyer. That money could pay a buyer's broker, or it could pay closing costs, or it could pay some of each. But for the first time, the buyer is going to have the say in what happens with that money. Whereas previously, our commission, the buyer had no say in what happened with our commission. The only time where that became negotiable was when we got to impasses in the road, right?
Yeah.
And then agents said, well, hey, like, we're too close to not do this deal. I'll put in $1,000 or $500 or whatever. But that was not the buyer directing where commission was going to go. That was agents keeping deals together.
So now there was a question in the chat about the new rules or new mechanics, and one that is expected and actually allowed is that concessions piece, right? In the under if things were approved as they are today, and please let me just remind everybody that, you know, this has not been approved by the courts. It is not currently in effect. We are having a conversation about changes to come. But one of them is, hey, you can't offer compensation, but you can offer concessions. And those concessions then, as you just said, could be used to compensate a buyer's agent.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep.
Or used for closing costs or used for repairs. But that's where, again, now for the first time, the buyer is going to get the chance to direct those dollars towards their service provider if that's where they want them to go, or if that's what the agreement they have with their agent states as to where the dollars will go.
And there's already some folks who are pointing out, hey, there's nothing in this that says agents on their websites or brokers on their websites can't offer cooperative compensation on the listings. It's exclusively represented in the MLS.
Yeah.
As it is represented.
And that's to kind of neuter that contractual obligation that the MLS created up to this point to say this commission's always going to get paid because as a broker participant, we've submitted this listing into the MLS.
Mm-hmm.
We put a percentage or a dollar amount in the compensation field. So now that's our contract with every other participant and broker. So that will go away, but it doesn't stop you from still, you could once let's say these rules take effect on July 30th, it doesn't stop you from on August 1st taking a listing at 6.5% commission and going out and offering 3% to buyers brokers. You just can't do it in the MLS.
Excellent. And then there's going to be, it's likely one of the other major points was a disclosure of commissions towards the end of the transaction, correct?
It's being proposed as towards the end. I don't quite understand how that works. I would imagine that we end up with some kind of a commission addendum or a commission document that is part of an offer. I mean, because truthfully, it's at the time of offer is when commission's going to get agreed to.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So
yeah,
that sounds to me like that has to happen pretty early on, as opposed to at the end.
Well, and I think you in some of the examples you referenced is that it might not always be static either, right? Or maybe less likely to be static as a result of this new environment that is not fixed per the MLS.
Yeah, which would honestly create a flexibility that's probably positive for our marketplace. Like I think if your friend called you tomorrow to go look at one house and you guys did a deal on that house, like wouldn't be unreasonable that you shouldn't get 3% commission.
Right.
And so in that scenario, you would negotiate whatever was fair that your client agreed was fair to pay you for your services and gets the deal done. Because in that scenario, what probably happens is that buyer can buy the house for less than somebody else who's asking for more money from the seller. You know, no different than the seller concessions that we've had forever.
Right. And I think as we talk about, and I will highlight a couple of things here in a few minutes, but we're operating in an environment. I asked you, like, how common is a seller concession in the current market?
Yeah, not common at all until you get to inspections at the moment. Yeah.
Right.
But there was a day where they were on every deal.
Yeah.
All of the early 2000s and all of the 2010.
Like basically until 2018, 19, right?
Yeah,
and even then.
much.
Now here's an interesting thing. The more savvy realtors on the call are going to say like, well, there's a limit to seller concessions, Andrew. And if the market were to shift significantly enough and seller concessions were more common, like how would that impact then how somebody gets paid? And you and I had a conversation about this. Like, have the rules always been the way that the rules are?
I mean, they've been the way they are for a long time, but commissions have been the way they are for a long time. So I guarantee you, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, FHA, VA, and any other lender underneath them that's lending their own money and sitting on it. The last thing they want to do is create rules that stop transactions from happening. Like they're in the business of doing the same deals that we're in the business of doing.
Yeah.
So to create rules that create barriers that don't allow those transactions to happen is not helpful for anybody. So those will start to change. I mean, you know, the first of those dominoes that I imagine falls fairly quickly if this gets approved, and a primary way buyers brokers get paid commission is through seller concessions. Is Sophie's hitting the nail right on the head, that buyers are going to be allowed to pay commission, and it's going to show up as a cost, and there'll be a credit from the seller, and just as a seller concession, as opposed to the seller paying the commission. So then it's just a matter of which side of the settlement statement does it fall on.
Right. Yeah, I think I think it's an interesting thing. I think as home values have risen across the country, how many times has the home value limit for FHA changed in the last 5 years, right?
I feel like it's changed every year for the last 5 years, which is crazy because it was the same for the 10
for a
years
very long
that.
time. And I think, you know, that's and again, you know, I don't know if this counts as like a safe harbor agreement or whatever we have to say, but like I don't want to put out there that these things are going to change. It's only to demonstrate that, you know, if the environment that we're operating in is changing, then there's a lot of things that can change around that environment that still allow a buyer and a seller to both be represented in a transaction. Last year, 89% of all buyers and 89% of all sellers chose representation to complete their real estate transactions. And everybody in this company believes that buyers and sellers are better off with representation. Deals get done more quickly and with more benefit and as a win-win. And so that's what we stand for. And that's what we want to have happen. And choose to believe that the world around us will look to make those changes as well. As Andrew articulated, there are a lot of individuals who benefit from the completion of real estate transactions. There's a lot of rules and functions that support good, clean real estate transactions. And those are more often than not predicated on agency or provided by agents.
Yeah. And one, to touch on what Debbie just typed in the chat a second ago, I mean, that buyers going directly to listing agents to get a better deal has been going on since long before these lawsuits. So is it possible that more people will do that because their eyes have been open to the idea that if I don't have representation, I'll be able to buy the house for less? Maybe. But I still think that there's going to be a large majority of people that are going to do the same thing they would have done last year, which is call the agent that they worked with 6 years ago, call the agent that's one of their best friend's brother that they met 2 years ago. I mean, that's the way most people do business. But yeah, could that population of people grow by a few points? Yeah, it could.
Yeah, I think that there's such a when we reviewed the numbers last week at the family reunion recap, I mean, there's 2/3 of buyers and 3/4 of sellers that have direct relationship or were 1 degree of separation, a la a referral from a friend, a family member, or a neighbor from their real estate agent, right? So 2/3 of buyers, 3/4 of sellers, all in your database and easy for you to demonstrate value to. So that dovetails nicely with a couple of things that are coming up, and I know Julia or Carrie are going to put it in the chat. Keller Williams Realty International has developed a course written by Jay Papazan, Gary Keller, and Jason Abrams about representing value as a real estate agent. It's called Value Squared. This conversation, where the rubber meets the road with this, take the courts, take lawsuits, take all that out of it, is in our ability to demonstrate value. And so that course is going to show up 3 times in the next 6 weeks. And it is on Zoom and absolutely available for everybody. I think that's where, as I said, the rubber meets the road in this conversation is, are we able to demonstrate value as real estate professionals? And that being the path to protecting our commission in a single deal, yes, but our business again is the thing that we're looking to protect here. Commissions are revenue, and we earn them by providing value. So I think that went in the chat. So be on the lookout for that. I want to jump back to just a few questions, Andrew, and then I want to also bring it to just a few things, a few key takeaways. So looks like we got some questions in the chat, so we're just going to hit those. Portia's question. Covered Ale team asked, how do we think that this is going to affect the admin fee in the office as far as the buyer representation document with having that as part of due commission? Because technically it does get assessed as an additional commission.
Mhm. I don't imagine there'll be any changes to that, unless somehow we find it as causing some kind of hurdle or something. But I mean, I don't imagine that doesn't continue the way it has.
Okay, great. We covered VA buyers, talked about that. As a listing agent, could we charge, this is a question from John Murchison. As a listing agent, could we charge the buyer a fee if they came to us directly?
It's a good question. I imagine you could. I would wonder. I'd have to look into a couple of things about the mechanics of that. I would wonder if there's an issue with charging somebody a fee that you don't represent. And I wouldn't think it would be a good idea to get in the habit of like doing dual agency with sign calls, just to be able to charge them the $1,000. I'd almost wonder if you'd be better off going the other direction on your listing agreement, to say that like this is the commission that I'm going to charge, and if there's not another agent involved, then like I'm gonna have to be able to collect X, whether that's ultimately just coming from the seller or what. I'm just not sure if you can get away with not representing somebody and charging them some kind of a fee or a commission. So I'd have to look into that.
Tom Newts has a good question, and we'll kind of double click on this here in a second. But some of this operates under the assumption that the seller is still willing to give concessions towards buyer commission. With all of the conversation in the media, they may be less likely to do so or feel like they no longer have to. If that was the case, how would a buyer's agent get paid during representation?
I mean, the only way they're going to get paid is if the seller or the buyer is willing to pay them, right? I mean, so that again, I think some of these are going to have to be battles that listing agents are going to have with their own clients about why this is a reasonable idea. And the fact is, if you've got 3 offers and they all net the same amount of money, I'd much rather have another agent on the other side than not.
Absolutely.
So that's what it's good. It's just a matter of net. I mean, this is again no different than any other seller concession ever talked about. So, but yeah, I understand. And there's going to be some pushback with that, I'm sure, initially, especially if we're still in just as tight of a market in certain spots, moving forward over the next year or two.
I think that might have satisfied Jake's question about a quick script around like, hey, if I've got a seller that doesn't want to pay the 6% commission, or in the existing environment, I think to your right now business, Jake, if you have a listing active right now and a seller comes back with this, I think that's where you start with what we started the call with, which is like, hey, none of this is actually taking effect. None of it is expected to, within 100 days, probably, depending on when it gets approved and there will be a point where it gets approved. Then there will be a time set that it'll have to take effect, and then we'll have all of that run up to it. As we sit today, it is as it has always been. And I think if you can being educated on what's actually being suggested, where we're at in the process, it'd demonstrate great value as a fiduciary and also somebody who is with it for your own profession. So that's, again, our goal here is to leave everyone most educated. Let's see. Jeremy Oles says, what are we really paying the MLS and how will this MLS for, and how will this affect clear cooperation? So clear cooperation, again, under this settlement, to be eliminated from the MLS. And there, opportunities for that to be demonstrated in other places, but Andrew's as a member of the board for the MLS, and I see Jason Beard's comment right below it about the value of the MLS and NAR. I guess you haven't had an MLS board meeting since this news broke, so maybe we'll revisit that with you on a later one. Not to put you on the spot for behalf of those, unless you have any comments just right off the rip.
I mean, I still think this is we had this battle before we had clear cooperation in existence, and there's a matter of just doing the best we can to make sure that we're educating anybody who's reaching out to us about selling their house. And the idea that sharing it with less people is the best way to succeed as a seller is false.
Mm-hmm.
But we have to be able to get those people's ears in order to have that conversation. I think that's the harder piece of that. So
as it relates to NAR and how any of these settlements and Keller Williams settlement, which in part removed the internet or the national requirement for agents to be in NAR. I think we are exploring that as a brokerage in a local market and how that can affect things and what that means for the local association. I often talk about how there are a tremendous amount of benefits that exist for real estate professionals, and those did not show up overnight. I make no bones about saying that the National Association of Realtors is a very powerful lobbying organization, and the reason that there are tax benefits and corporate structures available to and essential worker status available to real estate professionals is due in a large part to a decades-long lobbying effort to protect them as entrepreneurs. We will continue to have conversations about where that value exists and how it can be derived locally at the state level or nationally. But just know that that's all an ongoing conversation for our leadership team and many leaders in Northeast Ohio.
I mean, to be without NAR just from like a rules basis, in a lot of cases would create total chaos in real estate marketplaces. It would be much more like commercial real estate in the sense that like nothing's transparent, everything is fairly hidden. Nobody knows who's who or what their goals and outcomes are, what ethics they choose to live by, as far, or at least do business by, if not live by. But that's created an environment where buyers and sellers ultimately win because agents understand each other's rules of the road, and that benefits everybody. And I think that's a hard one for people to believe in because it's just the way it is. But if it wasn't the way it was, it'd be a mess.
Yeah. Really well articulated. Eddie Golden asks, do we anticipate changes into the buyer's rep agreement at Dot Loop? You and I were not hemming and hawing, but chewing on that over the weekend.
The answer is yes.
The answer is yes. And as soon as we can, you won't go wrong using the buyer's representation agreement that currently exists. And we're going to work to make that a little bit more full-throated and dynamic for people, as we know that this conversation may lead to more conversations or adjustments, and we're going to continue to be dynamic. Rick Capretta, our partner at Ohio Real Title, asks how much responsibility falls on the listing agent to educate the seller on the importance of offering concessions. So that'll be an important piece of the puzzle is, taking listings at a lower rate and then effectively not allowing for compensation to the other side or concession to the other side may in fact not lead to listings selling quickly or the best outcomes. As you said, it's a conversation of net. So I think maybe Rick was just plugging. You can go to him for net sheets if you need help with this. So good on you there. Chris asked, won't this change how we handle referral commissions? It can be impacted by how the referred agent negotiates commission. That's a scenario I had not yet thought of. And very well could be, right?
Yeah, I mean, on the buyer side, for sure.
Yeah.
Again,
Well,
I
and I
think
think that
when
there's
we're referring somebody somewhere, I guess like the first question to ask yourself and to figure out when that's going to work and when it's not, because up to this point, like if a buyer was going to buy, the difference between using an agent and not using an agent was of no monetary value directly, right? So you'd refer your cousin that lived in Florida to an agent that was buying a house in his neighborhood. And that guy may now just not be a referral opportunity because he may be one of the people that says, I don't need anybody. I'm just going to go right to the listing. So there may end up being less of that. But I mean, when referrals are like legitimate referrals, like, hey, I've got this client that I've been working with and they just got a new job, and I sold them their house 8 years ago. Now they're moving to Texas. They need an agent when they get to Texas. So that person is going to be a far more legitimate referral that's going to sign a buyer's agent agreement with somebody in Texas and going to actually work with them and actually need and desire their value and their skills.
Again, it goes back to value, right? The cure-all, right? And we say this as a company, and you've heard every listing agent that's done a presentation on how they negotiate their commissions on the listing side is, in the absence of value, price always wins. And so the more value we have, the more secure we are in the price that we in the market will deem to charge. Eddie Golden asks, if we write in commission in the lines already in the contract, does a commission count towards a 3% concession? And I think we talked about effectively that's how the mechanics would play out on.
Not necessarily. I mean,
okay.
It wouldn't have to be that. I mean, a seller can pay a buyer's broker commission. A listing broker can pay a buyer's broker commission. So there's other scenarios other than seller concessions to pay a buyer cost. So any one of those scenarios could happen based on the settlement as it stands right now. It's just all of those things can't be offered up in the MLS as commission.
Yeah.
So
a good way to reiterate that none of this disallows compensation from seller to buyer representation. It just it effectively disallows the marketing of it in the MLS.
Yeah, exactly.
Jeremy Oles asks, I read that we can't accept a larger fee from the list agent than compensation, what our buyer's agreement states that we are due. So if I sign a buyer broker agreement at 2.5% and there's a 3% opportunity on a listing, is that true that I cannot accept more than what is agreed to in my buyer broker agreement?
I haven't read anything that says that. Doesn't mean it doesn't exist. I haven't read every piece of information available yet, but haven't read anything that talks about that at all.
Okay. Jen Ribble asks, how will we know if an agent or seller is offering a commission on a listing? Does it have to be discussed prior to threshold? Maybe crossing the threshold as that threshold rule.
Yeah, I guess what I would say is I would think you would want to discuss it prior to, just so you kind of knew the landscape ahead of time. So yeah, it's going to create a decent amount of work for somebody who's going to have to reach out to all the listing agents of the houses that they're showing. It'd be just like the old days before showing time, when you had to actually call agents or offices to schedule showings. Now you'll be calling to find out if there's any amount of either seller offered or listing broker offered commission available.
Kim Kapustik looking with a question, would listing agents be able to put buyer broker commissions in showing time or addendum supplements in the MLS? My thought would be not on the MLS, but again, Kim, I believe you joined us a little late. On an agent website or a broker website, the cooperative compensation can be displayed. Right now, as the settlement reads, settlement is proposed, it would only take it away from the MLS.
And again, the purpose of that is because like the MLS showing compensation is not an offer of compensation, it's a contract between participants. So if I have on my website that my listing is offering a 2.5% commission to buyer's agents, that is not a contract. I'm not required to pay that to somebody necessarily still, even though I put it out there as an offering. Somebody could write us an offer that's $25,000 under list price, and my seller says, yeah, that's great, but I'm not going to pay that commission at that price. Where in the MLS, we don't have the ability to just remove it. It still happens because at the end of the day, a seller just won't accept that offer. So not to say that this didn't always happen, but theoretically, just based on like the rules of the road, that buyer agent compensation in the MLS is a contract between buyer broker and seller broker that can't get manipulated by the buyer or the seller. And now it could, because it's not a contract between brokers.
Yeah, I think, I'm just reading Eddie's last comment here. For those that don't have the chat open, he says, I think we all as agents need to have conversations with our sellers that most likely someone's going to ask us for concessions in some form, and why that could be in their best interest, and establish your value to your buyers. Whether it be ability to negotiate right offers, travel, find off-market properties, all of those things. Deepening relationships amongst agent and affiliate partners was something that you and I both thought would be a likely outcome as a result of some of these changing rules, and how important it would be to have really strong partnerships with mortgage, title, insurance, home inspection, even Eddie just threw out there, or movers, right? And then also with other agents, right? To know that there is, as you indicated earlier, hey, I would much rather deal with an agent than an unrepresented seller, and what the value of that is, and being able to articulate that, but then also to be able to put deals together with individuals that have interested clients.
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing here is the fact that Clear Cooperation's on the chopping block along with commission in the MLS. And the thing that's funny about that is the only reason Clear Cooperation mattered was because of compensation in the MLS. So without either of them, we're in like an equally disturbing place as we were with both of them. To say that now, like, this could very quickly just drive a lot of agent marketing underground amongst agents, so that all of us have the ability to show value to the public, because there's going to be information out there that they don't have access to, which would be a pretty dirty unintended consequence of this whole thing. But that may be a thing that happens. So agent relationships are going to be key. And I mean, we talked briefly just before this about even maybe getting to the place where we've got way better information sharing between local franchises, as opposed to just inside of our own brokerage, knowing about a listing that's coming up because an agent put it in the Paint the Town Red Facebook post. But if we did that across all KWs, what would that mean for our buyer agents trying to get buyers to agree that there's value?
Again, it goes back to value. Question: if the buyer doesn't want to pay a commission and they still want you to help them in the hopes that the seller is going to pay the commission, should you spend time doing it or not? I think this goes to the buyer representation agreement. And that's why it is moved to the front of the line, along with the consumer guide, such that, you are going to articulate up front that, and I believe somebody pointed out, maybe Eddie Gold pointed out in the chat, that our current buyer representation agreement reads that we will do everything in our power and, within the boundaries of the law to encourage the seller to pay that. But in the event that they are not going to, that you're agreeing to a certain amount of commission up front for services to be rendered. And if someone is disinterested in signing that, that may be an indication of whether or not you would choose to go forward and work with them. Some questions around fair housing. What about fair housing? Can't this open the gate for discrimination and backdoor deals between brokers? I think you and I talked a little bit about some of the potential unintended consequences and who could be disproportionately affected in certain price points. I haven't read anything about any of the consideration from the courts or anybody about specific subsets of the population that would be more or less impacted, but it is
that's not an antitrust
yeah, it's not
issue, right?
yeah,
Like that's not they're not there fighting for the interest of a specific category of buyers or sellers. They're there to just decide like, are these activities price fixing activities? And it makes no difference if removing those activities damages people. That's not their role.
It's not the subject matter that now again, like there are as things change, more things can change, and they doesn't mean that it has to be compoundingly negative, right? Like there is a potential that certain things could change related to fair housing and representation that would allow us to serve individuals of at certain price points at a different way, at a higher level. I don't yet know what that might look like, but I know that as these changes start to manifest, they won't finish manifesting.
I think that a perfect example of one that could come up would be being able to use OFA grants to pay commissions, right? I mean, that you probably could sort of already do that because you can use the grants to pay closing costs, and if the buyer's commission is on the buyer's side, like you can do that. But I'm just like, I think there's, like you said, this will evolve. But yeah, I mean the end stands to struggle from this, I think, which is
yeah. Tom Seaman wants to know if if in the immediate future we write what he'll call a conventional listing. Do we risk the seller joining the suit or wanting to renegotiate down the road? I would think the opportunity to join the suit is passed, and part of what is written into all settlement proposals is that it kind of closes the door on these specific opportunities. And in terms of wanting to renegotiate down the road,
I would say for practice sake, it would be good to be having conversations with sellers about commission from the same perspective that you're going to be having them in the future. Which would mean to not say like, this is the commission, and then further down mention that this is what we're going to offer in the MLS, but rather like, this is the commission you're going to pay me. And then this is the commission that I would propose we pay a buyer's broker to bring a buyer, right? Just to start changing your mindset around what you're charging and what you're doing with the money and what you're offering. Even though the rules aren't changing for, I would say the earliest these things all happen would be in July is what was kind of proposed, but I would not be surprised if that's not the date.
What are some things that you want to see or that we expect to maybe get ahead of as a company that are with no commitment to specific dates or times or anything like that, but if we expect some changes to come, how can we get ahead of it?
Yeah, I mean, I think we need to start operating with buyer broker agreements immediately. I've referenced that and insinuated that the first 2 months of this year that was going to be a thing that we were going to start digging into at some point here shortly and start requiring at some point. And I think that that timeline just got sped up by a handful of months at least. So some of those dates you guys saw that were, if you were on from the very beginning, we've got 6 more dates scheduled inside of the next 40 days to have more conversations about this. And one of those, at least one of those, if not multiples of those, is going to be conversations about using a buyer agency agreement. Some scripts around it. We've got some agents that do it very, very well. A few of them are on this call right now, and those are going to be people that are going to get a call from us in the next day or two, asking them which one of these time slots they'd like to talk. Yeah. Because we want to arm you guys with that stuff because we're going to end up requiring it, like I said, faster than I had originally thought we would. But that's coming.
Yeah, as this continues to evolve and as the world continues to change, something I said on our Facebook Live Friday night. Like, I want you to know, like, we care about you, we care about your business. We are here to serve our agents and make sure that no matter what comes, like, you have a business that is worth protecting, and we're gonna invest time, energy, and resources in doing that. So what you're gonna see, some things that you're gonna see as we nail down what's gonna happen as a part of these NAR talks. It will not be a weekly update on the lawsuit. We will react to that and address as necessary. But these are now going to be, how do we level up as individuals and as an organization to deliver untold amounts of value to buyers and sellers in a shifting market? Buyer representation is going to be one. You saw there were maybe as many questions about how do I have this conversation as a listing agent, not only as a buyer's agent, handling objections and navigating seller concessions. Like, if you haven't worked the mechanics of seller concessions, that's something that we're going to want to educate on. And then, how do we leverage our partners in this conversation? I believe Polly Lorenzo just put in the chat, like, hey, if you've got a buyer and you want to have a great relationship with a lender, we are thrilled to be in the business with the ones that we are, and that's a great opportunity to have them as a part of the journey and ensure that you're protecting your client's opportunity to purchase and to make good on that buyer representation agreement that you're going to get signed. So be on the lookout for these things to get built out. Don't miss our spring market launch on April 10th. We're going to have a number of different things related to the market, related to this, related to buyer representation, multiple offers, listing presentations. It'll be a very fun and interactive day. So don't miss that on April 10th in Middleburg Heights. And then a couple more things I'll just reiterate. The Value Squared program, free to everybody. Use those links, sign up, listen to a conversation from the leadership of Keller Williams Realty International about how value can be demonstrated and how we can put ourselves in a position to not have that question. And then I'd be remiss not to remind you all that BOLD is coming to Northeast Ohio. BOLD is a program, an immersion program focused on delivering value to clients consistently over time. The dialogues necessary, I guarantee you that you will see the most updated conversations and dialogues for buyer sessions, seller sessions, and negotiation sessions, so that you will be able to, in real time, master the new language of real estate and some of the new mechanics. So tremendous amount of value coming down the pike. And want to just one more time, as we reach the top of the hour here, offer a chance for anybody to put any questions in the chat that haven't been answered. For those that asked, yes, this is recorded. We will be sharing it out, and really enjoy the opportunity to have this conversation with you all.
Yeah, this has been good. And I'm sure that there's going to be plenty more questions, and a lot of questions are going to come the first time that that somebody struggles with with getting over the hump on doing things a little differently. And it's probably going to feel weird at first, and we'll get through it. It'll feel just as weird potentially as the first time you did a deal, and that's okay.
Yeah,
we'll get through it.
Yeah, it's that's a great way to look at it, right? It's like a new first time. And if you don't, Andrew and I and the entire leadership team will avail ourselves to help you troubleshoot anything. And please don't hesitate to reach out, because it's going to give us insight into what's taking place in our market, so that we can make sure we're delivering value to fill the gap for every agent in this company. All right, I think that's gonna do it. Just looking at this last
question from Christy.
How will a list agent know if the buyer's agent is already being compensated by the buyers directly when talking to sellers about offering buyer's agent commissions on a listing? I think that goes to one of the items, which was a commission disclosure. that'll take place at the time of the offer, and could end up as a negotiable item, right, Andrew?
Yeah, I mean it's absolutely going to be negotiable, and that's primarily because of the fact that the buyer will be involved in it. Where previously a seller could negotiate it when they signed a listing agreement, but then that was kind of the last moment, unless agents were willing to start negotiating it.
Yeah.
So
great.
All right. And yeah, some of this stuff, it's kind of unknown what kind of regulation may come down the pike that's going to say like, yeah, you have to do this at this time. And that once we get more clarity around some of that stuff, we'll have a better understanding. But right now, when a commission disclosure gets done is unknown, but at the very least, it's going to have to get discussed at the time of an offer, period. So
yeah, and we will, as things evolve, so will we. But thank you very much. Big shout out to our broker, Andrew Ginter, who, is it true you've already read the 108-page settlement multiple times?
no, I wish I had already
well.
had it. I just got it in my email 2.5 hours ago.
Yeah. Well, some
working off of a 4-page fact sheet for now.
anyone who has any questions that they didn't get answered or they didn't want to ask, please, Andrew and I available and happy to help with that for anything anyone needs related to this or not. If you just need help with your business, those are really fun questions to answer too. All right. Have a good one all.